Imagine, demand and build a world transformed.
And so first, thanks for organizing this and for inviting me. It's really exciting. And then sorry, because I will be reading from this other screen, so I won't be looking at you, although I can see each other, but it's a bit annoying. So sorry for that. Yeah, so okay, so yeah, I guess this project starts from a similar experience. It's something that not only in the report, but also as part of bigger group. It's like it's a small network of people engaged in activism and different municipalist platforms in different places. So we have this feminization of politics group or network where we are learning and sharing experiences and so on. And yeah, I guess the reason why we started with that was that even though there's incredible differences between the political context in which we work, these things are happening everywhere. So we're using this as also like a support space for activists, and we are also developing and trying to understand a bit better what it is we want to do and how to do it. So although I'm the one here, I want to stress that this is part of a bigger project, and that anything I say or share is something that comes from a collective learning process. And and as Deborah was mentioning before, this is a project that is connected to municipalism in particular, but it's of course something that so the discussions and also many of the lessons are relevant for other kinds of organizations, other kinds of political parties, other kinds of movements, collectives. But I wanted to say something really small about why I think there's this more natural connection in the case of municipalism compared to some other experiences, at least. And I think that there's a problem with big organizations and centralized organizations, and feminist agendas are much harder to implement in such environments. In municipalism, well, there's lots of things that we could say about that, but starts by working at the local level where people actually live and where they can have meaningful relationships with each other. So yeah, one of the reasons why we're working on this issue is that, I don't know, this something like a good fit between the two agendas, the feminist agenda and the municipalist agenda. It's easier to implement the feminist agenda starting by the local level, and also if you're trying to do municipalist politics, there's lots of things that you can learn from feminism if you want to change the way politics is done. So yeah, I just wanted to make that explicit, because nowadays in the UK, but also in many other countries, that it seems that the discussion, at least in the left, is whether to continue with traditional forms of organizing political parties and also discourses and so on, or whether a populist leftist strategy is more useful. And well, from a feminist point of view, I think there's lots of problems there. If these populist projects, although they might be more appealing for certain people, they don't really change the way politics is done. They don't. They're not able to touch, like to go to the center or to the basis of the problem. So, and we think municipalism can do that, although it doesn't necessarily achieve it, but it has a greater potential of doing that. So, and that's all I have to say about municipalism in particular. And I'm going to share a few slides with you, so it's easier to follow. And just give me 1 second so I can see whether this works. Can you see it now? Good.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So again, of course, we're talking about building power in a feminist way, and I wanted to start with a question, with a phrase, a provocative reflection, which is that we need to give up power if we want to build collective power. And we will be saying a lot about that, but I wanted to keep that in mind. And then why feminization of politics? There's different ways to answer that question, but I've chosen to mention two. First, it's a matter of principle. I don't know how to say it, but it's a matter of values. And we think that the feminist agenda should go beyond just focusing on policies and on the outcomes of politics. And it should also have an impact in the way we do politics every day and the way we relate with each other. So we should do it anyway, even if the outcomes are affected. This is also part of how to do politics. And then there's also a strategic argument for the feminization of politics, and is that it seems that at least nowadays, of course the situation is different in different countries, but the disaffection with politics seems to be quite generalized, and it's really difficult to mobilize people if you don't do politics in a different way. And also feminism is on the agenda. It's really important to ignore the claims of feminists, especially young people who want to change, to radically change the way politics works, and who want to see other kinds of people doing politics, who want to get involved and who don't have a chance of doing that. So if we don't bring feminism into politics, it's really difficult to engage with people nowadays. So yeah, so it's also useful if we do that. We can probably be more successful, which is really, really important in a context where extreme right or conservatives are appealing, because they manage to mobilize people internally to reach them. So I think there's a lot of work in the left to really think how we can reach people, and what we can do things in a way that is appealing and that makes sense for them. But then what do we mean by feminization of politics? And there's many ways to respond that again. So I will start with what it is not. And it's not simply a struggle for mere gender equality. We don't want more women in politics. That doesn't change anything on its own. Actually, because politics is done in a way that forces women to adapt to those ways, and also other non-privileged people to adapt to patriarchal ways of doing politics. So it doesn't really, so the people who are able to enter politics, even if they are not privileged men, they are usually the ones who are already privileged in some other sense, and who are able to adapt to those patriarchal ways of doing politics. And it's not an attempt to promote feminine traits either. It's not about, I don't know, following the stereotypes of what being feminine means or anything like that. It's not a defense of women acting like men either. So of course, we'll go deeper into that. But it's not about like having stronger women and things like that. And I put it here, but it's related to what I was saying already. It's not this liberal feminist project of simply having more women in power and having more CEO women and more women in parliament. It's not enough. So what it is, in contrast to what I was mentioning so far, it is a project to change the form of politics. In addition, of course, to the outcomes of politics, but it's also about how we do politics. And I've chosen a few elements. Of course, we could talk for a long time about what it means, why also does it make sense or not to use feminization and so on. I've chosen a few of the elements that we are working with, and there's the issue of care, bringing care, not simply care work, but also care for others to politics. So politics becomes something where people can feel more at home, and not something just for a few strong ones. Also paying attention to relations and cultivating relationships, not simply focusing on being efficient, and so on. It also includes horizontality. I will go deeper into that later, but distributing power and basically getting rid or trying to get rid of privilege. Inclusiveness, that's quite clear as well, and we will go back to that. And I just wanted to mention a few more like technical, let's say, dimensions of the approach. It should be a cross-cutting issue, not simply something for the feminist group in our organization or the feminist bunch. We're always insisting on the same issues. It should be something that is taken into account in every dimension of what organizations do. And it also includes a shift in priorities. This is something that already came up in the exercise before. It seems that there's never time for this, right? So it means also taking the time to do things in a different way. And finally, it means implementing new structures, not simply, I don't know, advocating for things, but changing the rules of how we organize and how we, and how we decide when we need to make decisions. So now I will mention a few of the dimensions of the feminization of politics that we have analyzed in this report. Of course, they are all connected with each other, and I will just very briefly summarize them. We can talk about them later in the questions, and of course you can also read the report and get a deeper idea of what they mean. And we will start with gender balance, although I said that it's not about gender balance, but it's also about gender balance. This is the very, very, very basis from which we can start working. If we have male-dominated spaces, it's really difficult to do these things. So one of the things that we propose and we have been experimenting with, and probably other other ways to do that too is to distribute time, tasks, responsibilities, visibility in a more egalitarian way, paying attention to how they are distributed, like doing the kind of diagnose of how they are actually distributed, implementing affirmative action, mapping responsibilities and visibility, and how people are actually doing things, having strict rules about certain things, like about the use of time and things you probably also already know. Also training and measuring everything. I think that's also important. Not simply having diagnosis, but also, I don't know, measuring time people use in meetings, measuring, I don't know, counting how many times certain people are given visibility, I don't know, on the media or in other places, or, and many kinds of things. But again, this is just the very, very basis of the work, and it's not the focus at all. So the second one is a bit more interesting, and it's leadership. Traditionally, of course, leadership has been associated with strength, agency, and certain masculine characteristics. And a leader is someone that decides for others, basically, right? And also is, sorry for that, it's also someone who is infallible and strong. And this is first intrinsically negative because it has lots of weaknesses. It's less stable, it's less democratic. Again, it's more prone to making mistakes because it doesn't rely on collective intelligence. And many other things. And not only it is intrinsically negative, but it also affects certain people in a particular way, non-privileged people, because they are subjected. I don't know how to say this in English. Like they face, or whatever, imposter syndrome. Or backlash effect. When they try to behave like a strong leader, they suffer a greater rejection compared to people who already have certain privileges, and also burnout, because certain people with no privileges struggle much harder in order to adapt to those ways of leading. So it's it's also negative for people who don't, who try to learn to do that and cannot do it. So the idea is to change the way leadership is understood, and we think a feminist way of leading includes building relationships. So the leader is the person who facilitates building relationships in the group, recognizes the dependency that they have on the group, because actually even strong leaders already depend on a bigger group. The key is that our patriarchal ways of doing simply hide that, right? And we want to make that visible. And also feminist leaders are not afraid of recognizing mistakes. They listen and they gather people. And also an interesting element here is that in order to change the way we think about leadership, it's interesting to think about the approach that we have towards problems. Usually in politics, problems are not technical things where we can find just one answer, where there's no right answer. So we can choose the person who knows better, and then that person is going to be leading. Usually in politics, there's disagreements, and we need people who can be mobilizers, who can help others find a consensus about, or an agreement at least, about what should be done. So so it's important also to to take this into account and not to see problems as a technical thing, but as some people call adaptive problems. We need leaders who help people going to the next step, and not finding the right the right solution. And how to do that? Well, lots of things can be done, assigning responsibilities to groups, but in particular, rotating. So everyone can get to know what needs to be done. This also helps addressing things that were mentioned before, like jargon and many other things. So when people have the responsibility of doing certain things, they learn really quickly, but sometimes we don't delegate responsibilities. So rotating is a great way of doing that, and mentoring, among many other things, of course. Next element, care. I was mentioning that at the beginning. Again, lots of things that we could say about care. And I've said this already, it's not simply about care work. So who is taking care of dependent beings? It's also taking care for our peers in our daily interactions, and also self-care. So the proposal would be from the organizations, from the side of who has the resources, to put resources at the service of implementing care practices within organizations. And what in particular we could do, like, I don't know, safe spaces for people to be comfortable, to feel welcome, mediation when there's conflict. So not ignoring conflict, but bringing conflicts to the surface and processing them in a way that it can be productive, so that everyone learns, and also relationships are mended. Sorry, my English sometimes fails.
English is great, Laura.
Thanks. And of course, distributing care work and also supporting care work. This means not only supporting those who are already doing it, but also distributing it better, and assuming that as a collective responsibility and not as an individual burden. Also using humor and detecting burnout, not when it's exploding, but like finding mechanisms to take care of people and to allow them to take care of themselves. Like, I don't know, having meetings until 12 at night is not a good idea, or having meetings of 5 hours, or I don't know if it's your case, but I've suffered that in the past, and it doesn't make any sense. So many other things. Then, of course, democracy is also related to this. Not democracy, representative system, but internal democracy, collective decision making. And here, there's lots of things that we can say about it again, but I wanted to mention one in particular, which is, it doesn't make any sense to simply open decision making to everyone and not paying attention to how decisions are made, where they are made, who is making decisions, and what's happening next, so that everyone can know when, how, and who is making decisions. Because informal participatory mechanisms just reproduce informal hierarchies. And so decision-making mechanisms need to be efficient, they need to be horizontal, and need to be clear, so people can decide beforehand where to put their energies, and not simply go to meetings and talk about things, leave the meeting and with no idea of what's going to happen next, who's going to be doing what, and losing their time mainly. That's a great strategy if you want to demobilize people, inviting them to give their opinion and then not doing anything about that. So yeah, again, there's many tools for that: facilitation, decentralization of decision making, also to allow people who don't feel comfortable talking in front of many people to feel safer. So having smaller groups, allowing for online and offline interactions and participation. As I said, clarity about when things are happening and how, and accessibility, also supporting newcomers and things like that, so they can understand what's happening. Most of those things are probably obvious, but we know them, and then we sometimes forget about to implement them. Then another element is intersectionality, and there's only 2 more left, so don't worry. And here it's important, I mean, not only in terms of diversity and of, so that's a goal, right? To allow different people to engage and to participate in decision making. But the problem is that different people participate and engage in different ways. And I guess one of the key challenges is to not assume that the same kinds of tools work for everyone. So being more open sometimes doesn't help. Being more proactive or inviting people to any kind of activity. So, and this is really tricky. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. But 2 things can be said about this, and I think we're quite convinced about them. One is that this should also be a cross-cutting issue, that we should include intersectionality in any area of the work that we do in our organizations. And at the same time, it's a great idea to have a group of people focus on that in particular, because otherwise it's one of those issues that gets diluted, you know, like, yeah, of course we're feminists, we're intersectional, but then it's no one's job. So it's also interesting to have a group of people in charge of that, like doing the follow-up of how we are doing in terms of addressing diversity and how inclusive we are, and so on. And in terms of how to do that, here it is really important to listen and not leading. So asking what people need, what they want, instead of coming up with the answers from our side, because not everyone is interested again in the same things, and some people might be interested in, I don't know, contributing in certain ways and some in others. So so I guess those would be the main issues. So it should be a cross-cutting issue, and also we should be listening more and and being proactive, but not imposing solutions. Then nonviolence is also one of the elements. This is, of course, a very big issue, and here we are thinking, of course, from physical violence, but like starting from physical violence, but also we're thinking about many other kinds of violence that many people suffer even in leftist political organizations, like mansplaining, interrupting, making jokes, criticizing, environmental harassment, and so on. And how to deal with that? There's several organizations that have been working on a non-punitive or on different non-punitive approaches towards this, so it doesn't become another form of patriarchal justice, simply revenge or like causing more harm on people, but using this as a learning as a learning opportunity. And one of the most interesting tools that we have been looking at is collectively drafted protocols to deal with violence, to distinguish within different types of violence, the different kinds of responses that different kinds of violence deserve, and also using the drafting of the protocols themselves to to learn and to raise awareness about different forms of violence, and also supporting victims, and many, of course, there's many other things connected to that. And then finally, power. And here, this final element is related to what I was talking about at the beginning, or the phrase that I was mentioning at the beginning, like so how it is important for us to change the way we see power. It's similar to what happens with leadership, right? Power in the patriarchal society we live in is usually understood as being able to impose your will on others, right? It's power over others. And from a feminist perspective, and there's a lot of really interesting work around that. If you're interested, you can probably just Google it. There's lots of literature about that. It's interesting to shift from this power over perspective to a power with, or power to do something together. And this means going from confrontation to collaboration, and not only with the people from our group. It also means contributing to a culture, a political culture, where confrontation is not the rule. It's not simply collaborating with our own and then destroying the enemy, right? A feminist way of doing politics would mean understanding power also in relation to others, and not simply, as I was saying, to our own people that are the like-minded ones. So one of the tricky things here is that it's difficult for feminists to build power in this way in a context that is where power is exercised in this other way, this confrontational way. So if you come up with a, I don't know, more constructive, collective way of doing things, you will probably just be smashed by the other side. So this is a really tricky project, but there's many things that can be done. And in my experience in Barcelona, the fact that Barcelona en Comú changed its political discourses compared to other political parties, for instance. And it's probably changing now, but especially at the beginning, it was mainly about common good, about common issues, about common struggles, about, like, I don't know, things that people care about, instead of that party is doing that and we are going to destroy the elite or capitalism or whatever. People are not interested in that. So here again, it's not simply a matter of principles, but it's also a matter of strategy. It's not, so having abstract enemies doesn't really work. And that's actually why the extreme right gets lots of support, because those abstract enemies like immigrants and so on, they are people they actually relate with, and they put their energies in hating the people that they have near them. But capitalism is more difficult, right? I mean, if you say that my plan is to end capitalism, my mother would say, yeah, but what do you mean? I mean, I don't care about capitalism. I just care about the things that I care about. So okay, there's lots of things that we can say about political discourses here. But it's not only about that. It's also about building collective support for feminists and for activists who are trying to do to build power in this way. Never go into the fight alone. So be aware, make sure that you have a group of people that will support you if you are going to be put in a position of vulnerability and also use humor, safe spaces, and many other things. And sorry for this, like, lots of information, very superficial, but I wanted to give an overview of all of the different elements that are connected and very closely connected to each other as well. So I will leave it here now. And I wanted to go back to the phrase at the beginning. And now, as I understand, we will take a few minutes to breathe, smoke a cigarette, or go to the toilet, or whatever you need to do now, and relax. And I don't know, Deborah, do you want to explain it more? Or
Yeah. So
how long?
Thanks so much, Laura. Thanks so much. That was really, really interesting. And yeah, it's our fault that we asked her to talk about every single topic. So thank you. Basically, we thought that it's quite a lot to take in, and that we just like take 5 minutes, listen to some lovely music, and sort of, go to the toilet, whatever you need to do. And then we'll go into questions. And please don't leave the Zoom. Just stay on. Are you all back? I have no real means of finding out because everyone's got their cameras off. Basically, if you're not back, you're gonna miss out. So we're gonna get started again. So yeah, as I said at the beginning, we're gonna do a small section now for questions, and then we're gonna actually go into power and like really discuss that in detail. Emma, do you want to sort of hit us off?
To hit you off with the questions, sure. So thanks for all the questions that you posted in the chat. There were just a couple of clarification points that would be great to start. Laura, a couple of people have asked whether or not it would be possible to get a copy of the slides. Specifically, someone's interested in maybe talking about this in a local political education group. Share those potentially. That would be great. And also, someone questioned the term harassment. So I wonder if you could just quickly explain what you meant by that.
I couldn't hear which one, sorry? By?
Environmental harassment?
Yeah.
I also have no clue what that means.
Yeah, well, it's actually a term that is more famous in working contexts where people might feel discriminated or harassed by how the dynamics in the workplace take place. Let's say, I don't know, you're a woman coming into a new job where you have like 20 where there's 20 men and they start making comments about about your clothes or about what you're doing later, or yeah, I don't know, there's many ways of, like, it's not it's situations where there's no clear I don't know, there are no insults or no specific things or specific conducts that can be identified as discriminatory or as harassment, but the whole dynamics of the place make you feel like you don't belong and you cannot participate there. So yeah, it can get much more technical, but
that was great. Yeah, I think that really helps clarify the term. Thank you.
And did you say, are you okay to share the presentation with participants?
I will in a second. Yeah, sure.
Amazing.
Okay, we're going to ask questions in sort of 2 rounds here, and if the people that ask the questions, if they feel confident to sort of ask them themselves, and that would be great. So, but by all means, if you don't want to, then maybe just don't say anything, and then we can read the question for you. But there was a question in the chat from Inti around sort of how to democratize decision making, maybe. Inti, if you're there, I don't know if you want to just maybe elaborate on that a bit. But if you could try and keep the question to sort of under 60 seconds, that would be great.
And you should be unmuted now. Oh, don't have a camera or mic. Right, we'll read it for you.
Ah, okay, no problem. So Inti basically asked what methods might you have for mobilizing intelligence, and she sort of clarified that as she's particularly interested in mobilizing collective intelligence in such a way that people don't walk away from meetings after saying their ideas without knowing what will happen next and so on. So how do we, are there any resources, or do you have any sort of suggestions for how you avoid common problems which arise when trying to do that?
Are you okay for us to take a second question, Laura?
Yes, I was waiting for Inti to raise a question, but I was pasting the link. I'm very sorry.
Basically to simplify it, because it is quite complicated.
I'm reading it now. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
can we take a second question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We'll go to Manfred next. If you want to ask a question yourself, Manfred, now is your chance.
Hi, can you listen to me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, my question was related. I mean, all of these recommendations that you've mentioned, Laura, are very useful, very necessary for us to, for all of us that work in organizations or that participate in organizations, to implement them. Most of them, they take a lot of time, they take a lot of resources, a lot of effort, and most of organizations deal in an environment that is obsessed with results, obsessed with outcomes. If we're involved in politics, the focus, of course, is winning elections, right? So how can we sort of like achieve a balance between these two things, between changing the way of doing things, of doing politics, which takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, and responding to an environment that doesn't give us that time and demands results and winning immediately?
Thanks so much, Manfred. Over to you, Laura.
If I had an answer to that question, I would be doing it, and I would have shared that with you, like at the very beginning of the presentation. Like, this is the way. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's I don't have an answer in it. Of course, it depends on the context, but I think that to a certain extent, one of the things that we need is a change in the approach, in the way we see priorities, right? And in my experience, for instance, at Barcelona en Comú, which is an electoral platform, a citizen platform that works as a political party, but not only. And of course, their elections mark the agenda, and you need to respond to that, right? And one of the things that came up many times was, to what extent this is a sprint or a marathon, right? Take the time to think where you want to be 10 years from now, not simply in the next elections, right? And there's this very masculine way of approaching problems, like based on urgency, and this is the opportunity, and now we need to seize it, and we need to go for it, right? And I don't know how this can be done, because it's really difficult, but I think like focusing on the long term is one thing. Another one is taking time to consider the different values that you have as an organization, and how you will balance them and prioritize them. And if there's just one always winning, then it means that you are not really defending those other values, right? So, but there needs to be a space to have that conversation, and not simply, I don't know, being reactive, let's say, to what the reality is imposing, but taking time to be proactive and to plan ahead. I think those two things are really important. Of course, it's very messy and it's very difficult, and sometimes you need to do what you need to do, right? But one of the things that some organizations do is, for instance, once a year, taking time to plan and to like involve everyone in rethinking how things are working and where you want to go, in setting like clear priorities and clear calendars and resources for that, so that you don't get lost by simply reacting to what the environment is proposing. Yeah, I think that will be important, but it's very difficult. And then about the other question, about mobilizing collective intelligence. Yeah, I think many of the things that I have been mentioning are precisely connected to that, right? Like how important it is to first make people feel at home in the working activists space that you are creating, and then yeah, and then to plan anything on the basis of that. Another thing is, and this is a bit tricky again, but and it might sound a bit in contradiction to what I was saying before about strategy and planning and so on, but sometimes it's good to in my experience at least, to start thinking about how to solve problems based on concrete things and concrete tasks and concrete activities, and not simply like, I don't know, broad understandings of problems and so on. So start how to deal with concrete problems and to get the practice of working together and so on. It's really difficult, especially with people who don't have any previous experience in, I don't know, collective decision making or politics, or the opposite, with people who have too much experience and they already know what needs to be done and so on. So I don't know, in the last few years I fell in love with good facilitators, for instance. They are, I mean, if you have good facilitators in your organizations who can understand what's happening, what the goals are, and create dynamics where people can, I don't know, relax and feel they can, I don't know, somehow some flow. I don't know what word to use. That's really important, and I don't think it's that much a matter of methodologies, but more of like people being able to relax and to feel, you know, welcome, and that they can, you know, share, or both things. Methodologies and structures, of course, are also important, but yeah, I don't know. It's difficult to give a concrete answer to that. It depends also on the topic and on the situation, but also focus on that goal as well, like making people feel good about doing it.
Sounds like, yeah, a very good basis for any sort of collective decision making, but I take your point that there are specifics depending on what it is that's being addressed. We've just got a couple more, if we can squeeze those in maybe. So I'll give you both of them, Laura, and then maybe you can respond to them both again. But we had a question from Valerie. Valerie, if you're there, maybe you want to just read your question out.
Hi, I'm just scrolling back to find it now. Hold on 1 second. Oh dear, where is it? Yeah, well, I was just wondering how you would stop. Sorry, I'll turn my video on. It seems a lot more sociable. I'm just wondering if we're bringing in things like mentoring schemes, you know, how do you stop those types of initiatives from just replicating the same old power dynamics, you know, the same old people putting themselves forward to be the mentors and the teachers, and it just becomes a kind of a reimagining of what we've already got and we're already dissatisfied with. How do you stop the old white men wanting to become the mentors and take over that process?
Yeah, I guess in this case, like in all the other cases, it's difficult to take just one tool and implement it without considering the other elements, right? If you want to use mentoring to have a more democratic and horizontal organization, and you don't have any, I don't know, gender balance policies or any, I don't know, collective decision making mechanisms or any diagnosis of who's been doing mentoring so far or things like that, it's, of course, you will fall into those traps, right? But I don't know, you can start a program of female mentoring, for instance, just female mentoring, or whatever criterion you choose. Of course, you need to have people who are able to do the mentoring, right? And maybe first you need to think about who is visible, who is doing, who has more experience, who can share that experience. And maybe mentoring is not the first thing you need to do. Maybe you need to give space to some people first and then do the mentoring or things like that.
That's great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and it's just a final question from Matt, actually, our sound guy for today. Matt, if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, sure. Apparently I can't spotlight myself. Sorry about that. What did I say? Yeah, so I was wondering if you found that some people who come to your organisation, since it has such like a different way of conducting itself, do some people find that alienating? Because I think people, I mean, from my perspective, I think people can join struggle for a degree of connection and self-affirmation. So I think in that respect, it could be a challenge if the first kind of reaction is an alienating one. But I don't know if that's even the case. So yeah, not too about that.
You're muted, Laura.
You mean an organization based on these principles that I was mentioning?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So maybe I need to be clear first. So these are like the aspirations, let's say. And some of these things are usually implemented, some of them are not. Some are implemented in some of these organizations we have studied, some are implemented in others. And this is like the nicest pictures we can draw about how we would like to do things. It's a great challenge, and sometimes there's steps forward and steps back. So there's no ideal organization like this anywhere, to my knowledge. So that's one thing. And so the question is whether people would find this kind of dynamic alienating if they come from other ways of organizing, right? Yeah, probably for some people, I mean, they will. I think one of the challenges that I was mentioning, maybe I haven't talked about that too much, but is it doesn't make any sense to try to find like homogeneous ways of participating that are I don't know, good for everyone. And decentralization and self-organizing within organizations are also really important. I mean, as you were saying, maybe and maybe also there are certain organizations that might not be the place to the best strategic place to be an activist if you want certain thing to do certain things. For instance, an electoral platform at the local level, like in the case of municipalism. One of the things that usually happens with these kinds of platforms is that they unite or they coordinate people with different backgrounds who come from different social movements, from different topics even, and they find some common ground, and then they decide to run for elections. A really good practice in these movements is when they are able to do that, but also coordinate and also have a good relationship with the other movements that already exist, and don't ask people to, okay, if you're becoming part of this, you stop being an activist in this other place because there will be some kind of conflict or something like that, or this is not the place for your struggle because we're focusing on something else. So I don't know, it's really the answer is really complex, and it totally depends on the organization. Of course, if you are I don't know, building a collective to I don't know, fight for trans people's rights, then maybe the strategy needs to be amended in order to fit that kind of context, right? And there's some things that you wouldn't want to do. So I don't know, in any case, I guess it's a matter of, I don't know, but being able to take a step back and see what's happening. It's something that came up in most of the elements, right? Like doing some kind of diagnose or mapping of the situation and then deciding what to do. So I think that's really important, and also listening to people and asking them why and how they want to participate, and not imposing the answers, because you might I don't know, keep on trying recipes that don't work, or work for some people and don't work for others. So I don't think there's a magic answer to that question. But
thanks so much, Laura. We're going to absolve you now of all attention being on you. We're going to go to the final part of the workshop where you're all going to hopefully get the chance to speak. And basically, when I spoke to Laura on the phone about this, she used a phrase. She said, we need to give up power if we want to build collective power. If you want to build collective power, you need to give up power. And I genuinely thought about it quite a lot. I thought it was a really, really, really interesting statement. And basically what we want to do in a second is go on a bit of a discussion about that and hear what that means to you guys. And also, if you can think of a situation when you could have given up power, or a situation when you would have liked someone else to give up power.
View the full TWT 20 program and become a supporter today to help us deliver political education all year round at theworldtransformed.org.